Look, I am gonna say some pretty controversial things throughout this video. I want to hear what you have to say, including those who disagree with me, but I just really need you to listen first, and please don't shoot the messenger. We, the audience of high fashion, have a recurring issue with the dirty little phrase house codes. House codes are the major themes that the fashion house founders started, and they can be really obvious motifs. Like, the main house code at Chanel is tweed. Gabrielle Chanel is the original founder of the House of Chanel, right? Really rowdy lady. She liked tweed because it made men kinda angry. At the time, tweed was for farmers or for like gentlemen on holiday to the countryside. No one thought of tweed when they thought of what well-off women wore. But Gabrielle Chanel is famous because she found a way to make it seem chic for well-off women. House codes can also be less obvious. It can be just a subtle nod towards the history of the house, like just objects from the brand's archive or even finding inspiration from an old show, even a single garment. But when we hear people accuse a designer of not respecting the house codes, typically they're just trying to communicate the very simple idea of the vibes seem off to me. I do not think that is a good or useful way of talking about contemporary fashion at all. Like most fashion fans, I really enjoy watching a talented young designer reinterpret the codes of a house. It gives me this feeling that there's a secret of fashion history that only I, the designer, and a small group of fashion insiders know about. I love having that feeling. But what I like more than that feeling is to allow a new creative voice to express themselves using the kind of world building that can only be afforded to you from a major global house with a big pile of money. Here's my point. When a new creative director is entering into their time at a major house, I do not want to hear a bunch of goofballs in the comments section talking about how they need to respect the codes of the house. Like, I realize this is a very hot button topic, but respectfully, like, fuck off. And only fuck off because it doesn't mean anything. Because most of the time when these comments are made, whether by fashion journalists or by big ol' kneecap 69 on Twitter, when people say things like that, they are trying to prove to others, performatively demonstrate that they actually are very big-brained and know a lot about fashion history. That would be appropriate if we were all together in a fashion history class, but we're not. We are looking at the premiere show for a new creative director. I frankly do not want to hear about how a dead guy is rolling in his grave or whatever. Sorry, how the fuck would you know? So we're currently in the largest creative shakeup in the fashion industry's entire history. So just to give you a brief summary here, Jonathan Anderson has left Loewe and gone to Christian Dior. The Parenza Schooler boys are starting at Loewe. Sarah Burton has left McQueen, Matthew Williams has left Givenchy, and Sarah has replaced Matthew at Givenchy. Demna has left Balenciaga and is going over to Gucci. Alessandro Michele has left Gucci and is now at Valentino. Pier Paolo Piccioli has left Valentino and will be starting at Balenciaga, and you can see it's like a little triangle that got rotated. Dries Van Noten has stepped down at his own house and appointed his first creative director, Julian Klausner. Tom Ford has brought in Heider Ackerman, who I believe is also the creative director at Canada Goose. The House of Lanvin is finally back on its feet under the creative leadership of Peter Copping. Celine has a fresh new direction under Michael Ryder. And Müller-Meester has had so many creative directors in the last few years, it is difficult to list or count all of them. Durand Lantique has just been appointed as the permanent CD at Jean-Paul Gaultier, which is sick. Simone Bellotti is at Jill Sander. Louise Trotter's at Bottega Veneta. Glenn Martins is at Maids of Margiela. Matthew Blasey is at Chanel. I'm sure I'm missing some here. I'm really not kidding when I say we are in the single biggest creative shakeup in the industry's entire history. Go back as far as you want. This is it. And speaking of history, if you go back in time, you can find the origin of the popular usage in the media of house codes in the 1990s when we were going through our last big creative industry shakeup. McQueen was put in at Givenchy, John Galliano was put in at Dior, Edward Buchanan started at Bottega Veneta, Marc Jacobs went to Louis Vuitton, and Tom Ford was picked up by Gucci. Amongst so much new change, the industry and just fashion fans needed a way to talk about all of that change in relation to where that change was coming from. So the term house codes got used a lot to talk about where the brand was and how it's being changed now. Usually in the 90s, the house code conversation was brought up to criticize the 90s because of how good things used to be so recently in the glamorous 1970s. We have always perpetually just been unhappy with the present. But guess what? That has literally always been the case. Most of the people complaining now, back then, and forever are middle-aged. If you talk to young fashion fans right now, they are pretty excited about new designers and what they're doing. It's just a fact of life that when you reach a place personally where you're ready to really focus on your career or really focus on building a family or taking care of an ailing relative, you lose the free time that is necessary to really investigate new art. You are not going to give 100 gecs the same opportunity to speak to you when you're 40 years old that you would have when you were 18. If you don't have the time to be able to take in a piece of art on its own terms, by default, you're just gonna think that it sucks. And hey, this is okay. I'm glad that you are having kids, and I'm really glad that you're giving your kids the time that they need to feel like they're building a relationship with their parents. But this is often the reason why we get stuck idolizing the golden days that we just recently missed. And as you spend less and less time exposing yourself to new art, while the world continues to make new art all around you, you'll find yourself more drawn to the art that was being made when you were looking into new things. And that must have been when the good art was happening, you tell yourself, after a decade of not paying attention. A great example of what I'm talking about can be seen with Demna's Balenciaga. Cristobal Balenciaga's focus on silhouette did end up actually being a substantial part of the brand under Demna. For his vision, it ended up enhancing the work. Here are just a few examples of that. But there are a lot of critics who will never be willing to acknowledge all of the Cristobal-ness that can be found in Demna's work just because of how far from Cristobal Demna's vision seems to be. Like the same people who will never acknowledge how faithfully Demna interpreted Cristobal are also the ones who are just perpetually outraged about Balenciaga branded wacky sneakers, which, by the way, defined a decade of footwear design. You and I could never have imagined the existence of the Triple S sneaker before it was brought to us, especially considering the codes of the house as we understood them before Demna. But the Triple S is a voluminous introduction to footwear that is very much in line with the voluminous silhouettes that Cristobal introduced at his time. I think that counts as a faithful reimagining of those house codes. The problem is, I can't find very many other people who agree with me about that. I would just really appreciate it if everyone could collectively stop pointing to the paintings of dead guys and saying, please just make it more like them. Are house codes the ideas and the goals that underpinned the body of work of a historic designer? Or are house codes just the glamour of an old black and white photograph? Which is it? Which one is the new designer going to be crucified for disrespecting? Are these house codes in the room with us now? If I asked a fashion person right now to tell me what is Chanel, they would say that Chanel is a fashion house that was founded by Gabrielle Chanel in 1910 that produces beautiful clothing and accessories. And if I said, okay, keep going, tell me more, what is Chanel? We would eventually get down to just a list of house codes. Chanel is tweed, they would insist. Tweed is a crucial house code, and those house codes make Chanel the brand that it is. I think those people are super well-intentioned, but I think we can all agree Chanel is not tweed the way that Gabrielle Chanel used tweed. That is Chanel. I mean, outside of the fact that there are literally other luxury brands that use tweed, Chanel cannot possibly be tweed. If it really worked like that, we would be saying dumb stuff that like McQueen is stealing from Bottega Veneta because McQueen uses leather for shoes and leather is a Bottega Veneta thing. Like, this is just literally not how the world works. If Chanel is not tweed, which it is not, then it's not just an amalgamation of all the other little motifs that you think make up Chanel either. The new creative director at Chanel, is it Matthew Blazy's job to just show us tweed in a way that we haven't seen tweed before? Or is his job to interpret the tomboyish vision of Coco Chanel in a way that we aren't expecting? Maybe that involves tweed, maybe it doesn't. I am excited to give it a fair shake either way. Because remember, the big accusation here is that these designers are not respectfully or not correctly interpreting the house code. So which way is respectful? I mean, we really are out here just assuming that we understand the true nature of Dior because we can tell people that the new look was a big deal in 1948. Do we even know what the core of Dior or any of these brands truly is? If the designs that march down the runway are not in alignment with our preconceived notions of what that house is about, then either that designer is not respecting the codes of the house, or maybe we just don't fully know what we're talking about, and I suspect that lately the problem has been the latter. If you're a designer who is currently being given the opportunity of a lifetime at a historic house, you are working against your own vision if you are constantly trying to conform to the vision of someone who probably would not be that great at selling clothes if they were working today. Like, I'm gonna really emphasize here, I love Martin Margiela and Cristobal Balenciaga and Hubert and all of those guys. I think if Martin Margiela announced that he was going to start designing clothes again, the industry, including your boy right here, would sound the trumpets and be like, this is the biggest news in decades. Martin Margiela is back. That first collection would launch and I would be the first one in line spending irresponsible quantities of money. It would sell the whole way out. But come collection 8, 4 years in, I think that we would be shown that Martin would struggle to communicate with modern audiences. We've all bought into this idea that reinterpreting the codes helps the audience to understand the essence of the brand. The more opportunities that we give designers to redo the exact same ideas, the more that we'll discover the true brilliance of the brand's founder. But I mean, you can rework those same codes over and over and over again, and eventually the market will have to tell you that there really are only so many ways that you can reinterpret those codes. How many times do we need to see a reinterpretation of a house code before we realize that house codes ultimately are just empty vessels? On their own, codes often mean nothing. I mean, I like Gucci as much as the next guy, but does the Gucci print really mean anything? I'm just gonna say this. I have no evidence of this, but sometimes I look at the tenures of designers that did not do well at their posts, sometimes extremely talented designers, and I wonder if that strict adherence to the house codes might have been the core of the problem. Because there are some examples where I imagine that the suits, the people in charge, were not giving the designer an option about how to use the house codes and maybe which house codes to emphasize. They were just kind of knocking on the door and saying, hey bud, look, the market research shows that things tend to sell the best if this is involved, so this is gonna need to be a part of pretty much every SKU that we're putting out this season. Good luck, happy Monday. Some of these house codes look stupid. Some of them are not needed in the present. Some of them, if I'm being honest, should stay in the past. Even if the industry is hurting, and even if the strategy for weathering this luxury slowdown thing is rooted in the idea of just repeat the house codes that people really like and maybe they'll keep buying stuff, there is no reason for our industry to do this. The logic goes that the brands are betting on heritage because heritage is what has been so good at selling small leather goods and perfume. If heritage was all that you really needed, why did you hire a creative director? Why do you even have runway shows? If these precious house codes, if these old ideas are so great, then we shouldn't need any of that. Just sell the old shit. Why would we change anything at all if it's working as it should? Folks, it's not working. I realize doing new things is scary. It is necessary. Heritage alone is not enough, and it never has been. Stop trying to make fetch work. Can we please believe that the vision of a young designer could end up being better than the vision of their long-dead predecessor? I realize it is difficult to swallow this statement, but could we please just imagine for a second a reality in which the Chanel inside of Matthew Blazy might be better than the Chanel of Gabrielle, of Carl, and of Virginie? Can we imagine a world where we at least entertain the idea that the Dior inside of Jonathan Anderson could be better than Christian Dior? If you are rolling your eyes at the last thing that I just said, consider that fashion history has already demonstrated that this is possible. I mean, in the 90s, sure, John Galliano and Alexander McQueen were praised by a lot of fashion journalists in the fashion public, but nobody would have said that they were better than the old masters that came before them. But if today, in 2025, you go to the campuses of the New School or the Royal Academy in Antwerp or FIT and you ask those 20-year-olds who their fave is, you're going to hear a lot more of Lee McQueen and John Galliano than any of the old masters, let alone the predecessors at the houses they were appointed at. All I'm saying is that when someone is given the once-in-a-generation opportunity to design at a heritage house with a massive budget, let's hear them out. And on this channel, we emphasize all the time, and I stand by this rule, you cannot judge the vision of a designer based on 1 runway show or 3 runway shows. It takes 4 ready-to-wear shows, that means 2 full years, in order to see the foundation laid. And then on show number 5, you can start really making an assessment about the world that they're building. It just feels unfair to judge the work of a designer at a major house, a career that honestly might last 15 years based off of 2 runway shows. That's ridiculous. We need to let them establish that foundation first. And we need to be okay if they say, you know what, there is no place for those old codes during my tenure. And I will consider, and I'd like you to consider, that they can come up with a vision that is better than the dead guys that came before them. So the making of this video involved Daniela and I yelling out ideas excitedly as we both frantically typed in the same Google Doc. If you want a little taste of that magic, you can join the Patreon where you're able to see extended videos that are questions episodes where Daniela and I are both mic'd up and we answer questions about the industry, about being fashion critics, and about fashion as an art form. It's a really fun time. Some of those takes are a little bit too spicy to just kind of throw out into the general public, so we keep them locked up behind a very reasonably priced paywall. You get dozens of hours of extra content, including that and a new series that we started about a year ago where we dive into the most interesting jobs in fashion. We have an interview with the owner of Darklands Berlin. We have an interview with the owner of the largest private helmet Lang collection on Earth, amongst lots of other just bizarre jobs. It's a party. Go join it up in the description. And if you're really interested in the idea of house codes, you can check out a previous video that we made where Mario Valentino, the company, and Valentino Garavani, the company, are fighting legally over who gets to use what house codes. It is by far, whether you're into fashion or not, it is one of the strangest, most interesting lawsuits I've ever heard about. It is one of our most underrated videos we've ever made. I truly meant what I said at the beginning. I want to hear your thoughts about this. I mean, this is a pretty controversial take. I realize it's something that's only in the high fashion, online community kind of take, but I do feel like a lot of people inherently just disagree with basically everything that I've said in this video. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to see you comment on other people's comments and, politely argue with them, all this other stuff. I love you all so much. I mean it. Goodbye.